You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
If we ever forget that we're one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under.
In nothing, great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense.
Whether we are black or brown or white, we all bleed the same red blood of patriots. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. It's been going on for a long, long time. It has no place in America. What is vital now is a swift restoration of law and order and the protection of innocent lives. No citizen should ever fear for their safety and security in our society, and no child should ever be afraid to go outside and play or be with their parents and have a good time.
That was President Donald Trump commenting over the weekend about the horrific events that took place in Charlottesville, Virginia over the weekend. On Friday, it all began with a protest, white nationalist march on the University of Virginia, holding torches chanting "Blood and soil, you will not replace us," and "One people, one nation, end immigration." And then Saturday, this is when it really culminated in violence and ended with 1 dead and at least 19 injured, when the white nationalists made contact with counter-protesters as they approached a statue of Thomas Jefferson on the UVA campus. And on Saturday, the Unite the Right rally, in which members of the alt-right and ethno-nationalists were set to protest the removal of a statue of General Robert E. Lee of the Confederacy in Charlottesville, Virginia. This was a absolutely horrific attack, as the president rightly said. Now, I want to go over the facts of all that we know so far, without jumping to hyperbole and making all these claims that simply aren't true. These are the facts. As far as we know, they have identified the perpetrator, I call him murderer, as James Alex Fields Jr., 20-year-old from Maumee, Ohio. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it or not, but from Ohio. A 20-year-old who, after digging deeper into this story, has ties to white nationalism. He, let's see here, sped his silver Dodge Challenger into a crowd that had been protesting the assembly of white nationalists, white supremacists, fascists, and others, according to police. This is from NPR. Authorities say Charlottesville resident Heather Heyer, 32, was killed in the attack. Fields has been charged with 1 count of second-degree murder, 3 counts of malicious wounding, and 1 count relating to the scene of the wreck, according to the Associated Press. The FBI also says it's opening a civil rights investigation into the incident together with the Department of Justice. Investigators want to know whether Fields crossed state lines with the intent to commit violence, NPR's Carrie Johnson told the newscast unit of NPR. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said the violence and death in Charlottesville strike at the heart of American law and justice. When such actions arise from racial bigotry and hatred, they betray our core values and cannot be tolerated. Justice will prevail. Now, Fields, from what we know so far, recently moved to Ohio from where he grew up in Kentucky. His mother, Savannah Bloom, said that she knew he was attending a rally in Virginia, but didn't know it was a white supremacist rally. She says, quote, "I thought it had something to do with Trump. Trump is not a supremacist," said Bloom, who became visibly upset as she learned of the injuries and death. She continues by saying he had an African-American friend, so... and her voice trailed off. She added that she would be surprised if her son's views were that far right, according to the AP. Bloom told a reporter with the Toledo Blade that she didn't speak with her son about his political views and that she wasn't aware of his ties to white supremacist groups. She said her son had dropped off his cat for her to take care of while he attended Saturday's rally. Now, there is a photo, again, this is all from NPR. There's a photo posted to Twitter by the Anti-Defamation League and reported by BuzzFeed. And in this photo appears to be a person who represents Fields, the guy who plowed his car into these counter-protesters. And he's brandishing a black shield handed out by a self-proclaimed fascist group known as Vanguard America. Now, Vanguard America denounced Fields' actions and saying that his actions in no way reflected Vanguard America's viewpoints. Now, what is Vanguard America? Well, as I said, they are a self-proclaimed fascist group. And if you go to their website, I think it's Blood and Soil, I can't even remember, it doesn't matter. If you go to their website and you look at their manifesto, their whole mission is about returning America to its foundational principles, but not the principles that you and I talk about every night. No, not those at all. Returning America to a white America. Only white America. Now, I don't remember that America was always an only white country, but maybe I haven't looked into these same history textbooks that these guys have looked into. But a completely white America, denouncing multiculturalism and saying that it's a form of tyranny. Very racist group, in my opinion. Now, to be fair, on their disclaimer, they say they don't believe in violence or unlawful acts. So, this would be consistent with that for them to denounce these actions. However, these racist viewpoints we have seen over and over again lead to things like this. Because racism stems from hatred. And where does hatred leave you? If you play around with it long enough, it leads to this sort of thing. But anyway. So, Fields is scheduled to appear in court on Monday. Now, I was looking into who all was protesting. Now, again, this was at a campus, University of Virginia, and they were protesting the removal of the statue of Robert E. Lee, Confederate general, saying, "You will not erase our history, you will, blood and soil," that kind of thing. And so you have this going on, and the counter-protesters were largely students and those who denounced white nationalism. However, those weren't the only people who were counter-protesting. You have some of these Antifa people who, I don't know how familiar you are with the Antifa movement. It's not necessarily a big movement, but it is dangerous. And it's out there. But they call themselves anti-fascist. And they really surfaced during the Occupy Wall Street movement back in, I think it was 2010. And during the anti-globalization protests of the 90s and 2000s. And more recently, they have emerged as a militant fringe of the hashtag resistance movement against Donald Trump. And they say that Trump is a fascist and a dictator. Now, they have been involved in setting fires and storming buildings. They did so at the University of California, Berkeley, to prevent an appearance of former Breitbart provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos. They also threatened violence against, the university that Ann Coulter was supposed to speak at if she was allowed to speak. So these guys are radical, violent, militant, evil people. Well, they were also at this rally, and they were protesting the white nationalists, but by using violence. Now, originally, this is just from what I understand so far, when the protest began on Friday, it initially wasn't violent. But it started to get that way, and then when the police had to show up because there were, disturbances happening there, this is from CBS News, they report that police arrived on the scene and declared the assembly unlawful. That's when fights broke out between the two groups of demonstrators, with some marchers swinging their torches. University police said one protester was arrested and charged with assault and disorderly conduct. Police said several people reported injuries, including one police officer. And then it just escalated on Saturday when violence broke out even more, and then you had this killer known as Fields plowing his vehicle into the counter-protesters. So, that's the gist of what we know. This guy, Fields, from all appearances, was a racist. Supported white nationalism and didn't like that the counter-protesters to that were out there, so he decided to take his vehicle and see if he could kill as many people as he could. Well, so far he's only killed one person, but only one person, one is far too many, injuring 19 other people. And this is obviously an outrage. And I believe the Justice Department has either done so or are considering opening an investigation more into this matter. Now, the New York Antifa, I just happened to stumble across this. The New York City Antifa tweeted out a response to this attack. They said the violence of the far right is not something that started yesterday. Their history of racist violence and racial hatred is why we fight them. Now remember, members of the Antifa movement were at this rally. And they were involved in this violence. These guys are also evil. And they meet violence with more violence. To me, this screams everything possibly against who we are as people. This is completely un-American, completely inhumane. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out how people could actually believe in any of these ideologies, whether it be white nationalism or the Antifa movement or the resistance movement or any of these movements that are clearly bigoted, racist, and vile. You know, when these stories aren't blowing up the news, it's easy to think that we've moved past this. And I think in large part we have. But that any sort of group of people is out there with this viewpoint baffles my mind. I don't care how small they are, that they're even out there at all. As a Christian, I understand, because it's sin. It's the root of human evil and sinful behavior. But even still, it's like you read about this stuff that happened centuries ago or decades ago, and you think we've progressed, and clearly there are some people who have not progressed. Now, thankfully, a lot of people have come out against this attack and have gone after both sides, as they should. But of course, the left, at least some on the left, are once again lumping this alt-right movement and saying that it's pretty much representative of conservatism as a whole and the right. It's not just a fringe element. It's kind of a pervading feeling in the right. And I'm thinking to myself, you dirtbags, you hypocritical dirtbags, you hate it. You hate it when those on the right are critical of Black Lives Matter, and are critical of the resistance, and are critical of these growing and ever-present violent movements that have corrupted and invaded the left. And you hate it when we bring that up because you think it's just so evil. Yet the moment there is a group that claims to believe a certain way and love a certain president, you think that means they represent the right and the conservative movement. I think we, as a people, left and right, should denounce this. Have nothing to do with this except to lock up the ones who are breaking the law and spreading violence. This should be an easy one, but even stories like this are not out of reach from the left, who want to use this as, see, look at the right, look how violent they are. Yet they won't even look in the mirror. We're going to take a break and come back on the Blake Johnson program. We have a lot more to talk about, more to update you on in regards to this particular story, and more that's been happening in the news in the past week and over the weekend. So we'll do that and more. So stay tuned. Back in a minute on Lanterns Radio Network. Continuing now with more updates on this Charlottesville domestic terror attack, which many are rightly calling it that. Possible update for you already. This is from lanterns.buzz, originally from foxnews.com. The organizer for the Unite the Rally event, Jason Kessler, was chased away at a media press conference on Sunday afternoon. Let's see, Robert Litzenberger, age 47, was arrested after a trooper saw him spitting on Kessler, state police said. Litzenberger was charged with misdemeanor assault and battery and released on an unsecured bond. Kessler was chased away from the press conference by protesters, many of them shouting chants of shame. He planned the news conference after a group of white supremacists went to Charlottesville. Okay, you already know that. And this is kind of an interesting development. I don't know how much truth there is to this. Like I said, still more details to come out. It would be very interesting to see if this claim that I'm about to read to you is accurate. But according to Kessler, again, the guy who organized the white nationalist event, he blamed the violence on law enforcement. Now, I am very skeptical of this accusation, but I believe in a fair system. We should at least hear the other side out and see if there's any truth to this whatsoever. After all, innocent until proven guilty, right, guys? So here's his claim. He says, quote, "The blame for today's violence is primarily the result of the Charlottesville government officials and the law enforcement officers which failed to maintain law and order by protecting the First Amendment rights of the participants of the Unite the Right rally. We networked with law enforcement officials and safety arrangements were made months ago, but despite this, the Charlottesville Police Department not only failed to act per the plan, but exacerbated the violence. They did not separate the demonstrators and counter-demonstrators. They were poorly under-equipped for the situation. They stood idly by when violent counter-protesters attacked the participants of the rally, and then they forced our demonstrators out of Lee Park and into a melee with Antifa. Photographs have circulated via the internet of counter-protesters carrying bows and arrows, knives, hammers, baseball hats, and even an improvised flamethrower made with an aerosol can. Participants of the Unite the Right rally were victimized by pepper spray used by counter-protesters. Again, this is according to Kessler. Despite the safety plan that was in place, the Charlottesville government backed out of it at the last minute, and a federal lawsuit was filed the day before the rally, and an emergency temporary restraining order was procured to require the Charlottesville government, blah, 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 blah. So basically what he's saying is they met with law enforcement and government officials prior to this event taking place, and according to him, they were promised they were going to be safe, no harm, no foul, as long as you are peaceful and don't, cause any violence, you're all good to protest whatever you want to protest. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. But it's at least fair to hear the other side so that way we can find some way to get to the bottom of this story. But there is something that we do need to talk about, and that is related to violence and the need for either side, their feeling of need to act violently, regardless of their cause, and then believing that it's just. But before we get to that, it's really important to talk about the woman who died that day. A woman by the name of Heather Heyer. I mentioned her before. This piece from the New York Times describing the kind of woman that she was, according to close friends of her, and friends who were there with her at this rally. Now, Heather, obviously, she was part of the counter-protest to this white nationalist protest. Friends described her, this is from the New York Times, as a passionate advocate for the disenfranchised who was often moved to tears by the world's injustices. That sense of conviction led her to join demonstrators protesting a rally of white nationalists in Charlottesville, Virginia on Saturday. Her friend Marissa Blair said, "We were just marching around spreading love, and then the accident happened. In a split second, you see a car, and you see bodies flying. The authorities said Miss Heyer, 32, was killed when the car driven by a man from Ohio plowed into the crowd." Miss Blair continued to say, "Heather was such a sweet soul, and she did not deserve to die." Others said Miss Heyer, who lived in Charlottesville, spoke out against inequality and urged coworkers to be active in their community. Continuing on here, let's see, this guy by the name of Mr. Wilson, Alfred A. Wilson, who was the manager of the bankruptcy division at the Miller Law Group in Charlottesville. This is where Heyer worked. She worked there as a paralegal. This Wilson guy, he said in an interview yesterday that he often found her at her computer crying many times because she would be on Facebook and social media and she would see all these messages of hate and intolerance, and she would try to promote peace and love for all. He says, Heather being Heather has seen something on Facebook or read something in the news and realized someone has been mistreated and gets upset. A couple of years ago, she was dating someone who became agitated after learning that Mr. Wilson was black and that they were friends. This is from Mr. Wilson. He says, "She just didn't like the way he was judging me as a minority male that's doing well for myself. And she broke up with the guy who was, according to this story, being racist." And towards the end of this piece in the New York Times, I think this is the most important part of this. But the sentence before this says, "A GoFundMe page was created to support Miss Heyer's family, and it's already surpassed $200,000 as of yesterday evening." And I believe the link is GoFundMe at Our Sister's Keeper, Heather Meyer, if you want to look into that. But this last quote from Miss Blair, one of her friends that was with her, she says, "I've never had a close friend like this be murdered. We thought, what would Heather do? Heather would go harder. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to preach love. We're going to preach equality. And Heather's death won't be in vain." This is where I really want to focus on. Right here. This is what we should, all of us, focus on. Love and peace. And not reacting with violence, with hatred, with anger. That is what has driven all of these events to take place over the weekend. One common thing: anger. Anger is a very dangerous thing. Righteous indignation. There is a good kind of anger. Anger at injustice. Anger at evil. At murder and cheating and stealing and all these different things. There is a time and place for anger. But anger left untamed destroys and corrupts all around it. Heather showed in her life example, the life that she lived and the legacy that she leaves behind, that love is the answer. It doesn't matter your race, religion, creed, whatever your beliefs are. Love is the answer. But, unfortunately, too many people are so seeped in their own ideology, they become so hard-hearted that they don't have any capacity for love at their current state, which causes events like this to take place, which causes people like this Fields guy to go in, plow through well over a dozen people and kill this person and injure many others. We've got to return to basic principles. I've said this before many times, but it's the truth. You know, I had a completely different show planned for today. And this story and other stories that we're going to get into, it changed it. And it changed it, I think, because our culture is sick. It is sick. And we've got to talk about that. But not just wrap ourselves up in the bad, but look for the good. How many people, I'm really interested in this. I wonder how many media outlets today, this week, will be focusing on the bad. Will be focusing on the guy's race. Will be focusing on white nationalism and somehow trying to tie it to Donald Trump and the conservative movement. And how many others will be casting blame on the other side? How many people are going to be focusing instead on the good that we can find out of this madness? Not ignoring the bad, but not solely focusing on that. Heather Heyer, I believe, lived a good life left behind a great example for many of us to follow. I don't know her politics. I don't know her religion. But there is some good that we can learn from this. And like this guy said at the end, go harder. Fight harder for love and peace. Not for hate, not for vengeance. We'll be back in just a minute and talk about more of the news of the day coming up next, so don't go anywhere.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Take a bit of a break from this heartbreaking tragedy that took place over the weekend. I feel like we've talked about it a pretty good amount, and believe me, everybody else is going to be talking about this constantly for the next several days, if not weeks. But there's another story that I want to talk about that has already been talked about a fair amount in the past, but I want to approach this in a slightly different way, and that's in regards to this Google memo controversy from last week. If you are not entirely familiar with the story or have forgotten parts of it, go ahead and go over it real quick. There was a Google diversity memo that came out from this guy by the name of James Damore. I believe he was an engineer, one of Google's top scientists. And he wrote an internal memo criticizing Google for claiming to be all about diversity, but apparently, according to this guy, secluding people for their beliefs or not really treating people equally. And I went through this memo and read it, and I thought he raised some really good points. Now, whether or not all of these points are true, for instance, whether or not Google is actually doing this inside their walls, I don't know, obviously. I do not work for Google, but I will say, after reading more into this story and the reactions from people who work there, and just reading some of the things that they've been saying, he's not the only one who has worked for Google and feels this way. So it is worth some merit of discussion. And I do think that Google should really, if they're going to claim diversity, actually have diversity. But what's really getting people riled up is this idea that he was somehow suggesting that women are biologically unfit to be in tech. In fact, this piece from CNN, the current arbiter of fake news, just in the first sentence, Google CEO Sundar Pichai, I don't know how to say this person's name, has condemned the portions of a controversial memo sent by a male engineer at the company who argued that women are not biologically fit for tech roles. No, that's not what he was saying. If you read the actual piece, he says that women, typically speaking, on average, and he said this several times, this isn't across the board, there are definite exceptions to this, but on average, women aren't in tech roles because they have interests in other areas, not because they can't be in tech roles because they're biologically unfit or lack the capacity, but because they choose not to, or they have interests in other areas. Now, of course, there are women techs out there in America. So obviously, he's not saying there aren't. But if you would read the piece, which I have to say, many of them did. In fact, it's my understanding that as this guy, what's his name again? James Damore, as he was getting fired, in the process of getting fired, he asked him, hey, would you at least, or maybe that was a different story, but I want to think that he asked them, hey, read the story first. But apparently they didn't, or at least some of them didn't, because the way they're reacting suggests that they didn't. Let me just read to you a quote from this actual memo. He says, I'm not saying that all men differ from all women in the following ways, or that these differences are just. I'm simply stating that the distribution of preferences and abilities of men and women differ in part due to biological causes, and that these differences may explain why we don't see equal representation of women in tech and leadership. Many of these differences are small, and there is a significant overlap between men and women. So you can't say anything about an individual given these population level distributions. Now, when he's talking about biological causes and differences, what he's saying is, I'll just read you a couple of them in summary. He talks about personality differences. And he says women on average are more open, they're more, directed towards feelings and aesthetics rather than ideas. That doesn't mean all of them are, it just means on average they tend to lean in this direction a good portion of the time. They also have a stronger interest in people rather than things. They're more extroverted, extroversion expressed as gregariousness rather than assertiveness. So women aren't as assertive than men typically, and they're more agreeable in nature. This leads to women generally having a harder time negotiating salary, asking for raises, speaking up, and leading. Note that these are just average differences, and there is an overlap between men and women, but this isn't seen solely as a woman's issue. This leads to exclusory programs like stretch and swaths of men without support. Let's see. He also says men have a higher drive for status than women. And he just goes on and on and on about this. And if you read it, quite honestly, me as a conservative, now this guy identifies as a classical liberal, which if you understand the term, you'll know that classical liberal doesn't mean liberal like it is today. It means more libertarian and independent thinking, and more of what the founders would call themselves. Now, I say he identifies as a classical liberal. Reading some of this piece, I don't know. I think in large part he is, but when he talks about microaggressions, and then later on he talks about people on the right are often blinded by their religion and by God instead of opening their eyes and seeing science for what it really is. And he talks about evolution and climate change and all that stuff. So, okay, well, he's definitely not a complete conservative. He's got some more, left-leaning ideas. But he's also critical of the left. He's critical of both sides. So if anything, I think he's being too nice to the other side. But that's just me, because I have a bias. And I am open about that. But yeah, I would encourage you to read it. It's a simple Google search for Google. And I just read the piece, and there are things in there that you will probably disagree with. There are things in there that I disagree with. But still, I think the discussion has merit. Not necessarily as far as Google's concerned. I mean, it is a discussion. It is a, discussion we should have about Google. But I'm talking more on a broader scale. This idea of nowadays, it seems like more and more people aren't willing to recognize the biological differences between men and women. That doesn't mean that men aren't able to do certain jobs or that women aren't able to do certain jobs, like it's impossible. It just means that, like this guy said, on average, there are differences. Now, of course, you can't just write about that. Oh no, you can't write about that at all. Because if you do, then you get fired for it. Now, the CEO of Google said, quote, "To suggest a group of our colleagues have traits that make them less biologically suited to that work is offensive and not okay." Well, first of all, he's not saying that they are biologically unfit. He's just saying there are differences which makes them choose different things typically. Secondly, how is that offensive and how is that not okay? Aren't you claiming to be an advocate of diversity? Well, if someone has a different opinion, even if it's incorrect, why are you so offended by that if you claim to be such a lover of diversity? There seems to be a double standard here, no? Now, like I said, there could and most likely is more going on here than we know, because neither of us work in Google. However, it is kind of interesting, and one of the employees by the name of Lauren said that she claims that they had some sort of big meeting, where they got all the people together to talk about this and how they felt about the memo and if they have any concerns on Google and to raise those concerns. Now, she says, Lauren, that there was a conservative who raised her hand and said, "I'm a conservative. I completely disagree with what this guy did and what he wrote about, but I'm still a conservative." But she also said that she's talked to employees that have different opinions and those who agree with what this guy did and what this guy said. So clearly this former employee, James Damore, clearly he's not the only one. Now, what Google's doing about it, I don't know. I would be willing to bet not enough because they fired him. But there could be other reasons for that too. I don't know the guy. But it is really, really irritating looking at this culture and seeing how many people are becoming more and more incensed by this notion that there are differences between men and women, as if those differences, for one thing, are even bad, and secondly, are even real. Yes, they are real. They're very real. There are clear differences between men and women, but that doesn't mean they're bad differences. I mean, just look at the husband and wife relationship. The wife, the mother, tends to be the nurturer, tends to be someone who's, softer at heart and more caring. That doesn't mean that the man isn't caring or that the husband or father isn't caring. It just means they're, on average, more likely to be better at that, and it comes more naturally to them. Likewise, the guy is better able at, being a dad and a father and being the provider. I mean, it's like, but of course, we live in a society where people believe that you don't need a traditional family unit. You don't need a husband or wife. Now it can be two dads or two moms or just one parent or a whole plethora of people claiming to be parents. It can be all sorts of different things. It doesn't need to be this old-fashioned unit of a man and a woman and a husband and a wife. No, because that's hateful and that's offensive, quite honestly. And I'm telling you, I think this Damore raises a pretty good point. And I think at one point in the memo he says, if we don't address these, if we just shy away from them and don't even care, then these problems are going to get worse. We're not going to fix the problem by denying clear, universal truths. And he's right. He is absolutely right. Now, I don't know what his future holds, but I can tell you this. I am willing to bet I know a little of how he's feeling right now. Feeling like, hey, I've trusted in a company. I've tried hard to work for them and do great things. And I took them at their word that they celebrated the diversity. And yet they silenced my opinion. I know how that is. You know, I've done this radio show for almost 3 years now, and prior to doing it for Lanterns, I did it at my old college, and quite honestly, there were moments, several big moments, where my viewpoints were essentially silenced, because they didn't really believe that I should have an opinion. I can't tell you how many times people at the college tried to silence my point of view and try to get me thrown off the air. That really tainted my view of certain aspects of not necessarily the college itself, but certain staff members and administration. And this goes to the bigger picture, the bigger point. The First Amendment is crucial in our republic. I was talking to someone at church the other night, and they were saying how their son is very liberal, unlike, the dad, who's, pretty libertarian-leaning and conservative. And he was talking about the Charlottesville incident, and he said, well, this just goes to show how hateful the Republicans are. And we were just talking, he's like, you know what? We're just talking about the bigger picture here. As long as it's not violent, speech in and of itself is worth protecting, but the First Amendment isn't even worth protecting if it's only someone's opinion that you like and that you agree with. The First Amendment really matters when you have to defend someone whose opinion you might even despise, but they have the right to say it as long as they aren't inciting violence and calling on people to be violent. They have every right to say whatever they want to say. Now, legally speaking, of course, Google has every right to fire this guy. They can fire him for whatever reason. But on a morally consistent level, they shouldn't have fired him, unless he was causing other problems too. But they shouldn't have fired him if they wanted to be consistent. But that's the thing. Too many organizations, too many people care more about their status, they care more about what other people think of them than what the actual truth is. And I know a lot of what that's like. We're going to be back on the Blake Johnson program to close out the show. Stay tuned. Back in a minute. Alright, welcome back to the Blake Johnson program. I don't think I've said this yet on today's episode. There's just been so many really important things to talk about that I completely forgot about it. But if you would like to keep in contact with me, you can follow me at my Facebook page at facebook.com/Blake Johnson program, or you can follow me on Twitter at Libertyville93. You can also follow this radio show and listen to past episodes of the Blake Johnson program on Spreaker.com. That is speaker with an extra R. Spreaker, that's how I like to remind people, because that is kind of a weird name for a website. But just go to Spreaker.com, look for Lanterns Radio Network, and you'll find my show up there. as well. You can also search for it on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Pretty much any major media outlet that you can think of that, produces and distributes this kind of podcast, it's on there most likely. I've come to find out. So just go and do that, and I hope you enjoy it. Alright, so in the last few minutes of the show, I wasn't going to address this just because I wanted to move on, but it is important now that I look back on it, and I do want to talk about this because it does matter, I think. Now, going back to this Charlottesville story, you heard the clip that I played, short clip of part of the president's remarks on the racist attack in Charlottesville, Virginia. Now, his remarks are drawing criticism because he didn't unequivocally condemn the racist groups. He just said, we condemn these acts of violence and bigotry. Now, bigotry doesn't necessarily mean racism. It just means anybody who is so incensed by someone having a different opinion that they feel the need to attack them. That could be because of race or religion or political viewpoints, just anything. So they're criticizing him for that. Now, on the surface, it's like, really? I mean, is that really that big of a deal? I think it is. Honestly, at least it merits some sort of consideration. Now, there's this piece from the Weekly Standard by Stephen Hayes, who I have a lot of respect for, and he's often on the Fox News channel, and he points out that Trump has a history of not denouncing white nationalists and white supremacists. Back early last year, Trump took questions from the media, and he was asked about a endorsement from the former leader of the Ku Klux Klan, David Duke. Trump said, I didn't even know that he endorsed me. David Duke endorsed me? Alright, I disavow it, okay? Just kind of shrugged it off. Now, his grudging disavowal, the way he handled that was, obviously it drew a lot of questions, a lot of criticism. Then he was on with I don't know if this was a debate or if it was an actual interview. I think it was an interview on Jake Tapper's show on CNN. And he was asked about this. And let's see here if I can get the quotes. He said, well, just so you understand, I don't know anything about David Duke. I don't even know anything about what you're talking about with white supremacy or white supremacists, so I don't know. Did he endorse me or what's going on? Because, I know nothing about David Duke. I know nothing about white supremacists. And so you're asking me a question that I'm supposed to be talking about people that I know nothing about. And Jake Tapper pressed some more. He's like, what about the KKK? That's who he's affiliated with. And he still wouldn't disavow. He's like, look, you may have groups in there that are totally fine and be very unfair. So give me a list of groups and I'll let you know. He says, honestly, I don't know David Duke. This is Trump. I don't know if I've ever met him. I'm pretty sure I didn't meet him, blah, blah, blah. So he just goes on and talks about this over and over again. Now, in regards to these specific comments, the white supremacists from the Daily Stormer praised Trump's refusal to denounce them. So he has shown a consistent pattern here, and it's concerning, I think. I mean, do I think he's a racist? No. I don't know that for sure. There's not enough evidence for that. But it is disturbing that he's not condemning people like that blatantly. And there was a statement from a unnamed White House official who said that in Trump's remarks about this shooting, not shooting, but this terrorist attack, that he included white supremacists. Well, then why didn't he just say it? I don't understand. But we have to be consistent on all sides. We have to demand consistency. We can't just shrug things like this off. We have to expect them to live by the things that they say they believe. Once again. So anyway, that's going to do it for the Blake Johnson program on this Monday, August 14th, 2017. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. We will see you back here next Monday, same time, same place. Take care, have a great week, and God bless.